BenGray.
Thank you. You want to pull the screen up?
I'm working on it.
Okay. It was November the 19th of 1992. It was the highest and yet the saddest day of my life. I really wasn't prepared for it, but it happened anyway. My boss called me in at 1 o'clock and he said, at Wood Psychiatric Institute, and he said to me, Ben, I've got some great news and I've got some potentially sad news for you. I said, well, man, I always want the good news first, so lay it on me. He said, you've just won the National Award for Child and Adolescent Research in the United States with Menninger and Chestnut Lodge and Timberlawn. So your consortia took first place. And I was there in California to receive your award. I didn't even get to go. And so I'm excited for you. And I said, well, thank you. And I'm excited that you're excited. And I hope that our organization can benefit from the research. Then he said, I have some real sad news for you. This afternoon, you'll be terminated. The research division will be closed. And you'll need to tell the people in your staff that they don't have a job. I remember blood rushing from my face. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I gave up tenure at a university. I gave up being in a healthcare center as a premier director to volunteer to be into psychiatric research, only to learn that it's not going to happen anymore. I went home and tried to describe this to my bride, and in a very loving way. She just took me in and understood this journey that we were about to go under. So during that time, I began to write a devotion book called Pain and Promises. I'd never written a book before, but I began to make a journal out of the process of losing a job. This isn't a white-collar recession era. When you're making $50,000 to $75,000 a year, then you don't have a job. That makes a pretty big dent in your salary schedule. So as I began to writing this book on mental health, I did it from my own journal, and somebody said, well, what if you made that into a book and somebody else would read it? So I eventually did, made a book out of it, and had a lot of fun doing it. It was a call from God. I'll get back with you.
Quick.
Here am I, Lord. Where was I?
Book.
Oh yeah. So I'm in, okay. So I wrote the book, and it's like, okay, what's next? And so I was sitting around the dinner table, and the expression was used of eating crow. Oh, well, that's a funny idea. And then my daughter said something like, Dad, would you pass the sauce? And there was sauce on the table, which was a barbecue sauce. And I said, what if that were crow sauce? What instead of it being ketchup, it would be crow sauce? And and crow is meaning you're wrong, you're sorry. So what if I manufactured a barbecue sauce that would be called Dr. Ben's Crow Sauce? And the tagline on it could be, when you gotta eat crow, you need a good sauce. And the more we played with the idea, the funnier it got. And so, I was John Brown. I had this idea of making a barbecue sauce. And so I invited friends over. We would cook a little cook a little stuff, and I had all these ingredients that I got from H-E-B. I'd go through the labels and figure it out, you know, add this and add that, whatnot, and people would taste it. I said, no, I don't put that in there. Well, eventually got a little formula for it and designed a label that would go on the front of it in a vanilla extract jar. Remember Adam's extract jar?
Yeah.
Well, I bought those things from Pennsylvania and started shooting stuff in there and putting a label on it. And the health department says, you need to come see us. I didn't know you had to have these things approved by the health department. So I said, I've never done this before. So I had this barbecue sauce, and they looked at it and said, okay, you have it tested by A&M. I said, okay. I did all that testing and started manufacturing the sauce. And everybody thought it was a funny idea. And it began to sell. And everything I ever manufactured, I sold. Even Holiday Inn was one of my, it's Produce Corporation. They have like 5 hotel chains, major chains. Well, those guys bought my sauce. That's another story, but the deal is, what I learned from that was, it's impossible to be depressed and creative at the same time. Because your brain is functioning differently. When you're thinking about possibilities, that's over here on this brain, and it affects your left hand. All order and numbers come out of this side of the brain going to your right hand. And so what happens is, when you're creative, you're always thinking about what else might this be? What could it be? And I never experienced depression because my mind was always thinking about who else would want this barbecue sauce? And what would it look like? And where would I take it next? Because everybody was saying to me, yeah, I want some of that stuff. I want those little shops in Fredericksburg, you know, and all little, those kind of specialty shops. Well, time rocks on, and I had a lot of fun with that. But I did learn it's impossible to be depressed and creative at the same time. And the lesson I learned also was I couldn't afford to be depressed. And I said, depression is a luxury I can't afford. I knew that because I worked in psychiatric facilities, and I know what they charge. And I couldn't dare go back there because they would drain me of everything I had and try to come up with the idea of saying, have you ever thought about going into business for yourself? Well, it made no sense to me whatsoever.
That's funny, John.
So I just decided, okay, I'll just jump out there myself. Why not? Oh, what ignorance will do. Then along comes a telephone call from the state of Texas asking me to join a team at the Abilene State School because they had a turnover problem. Can you take your degree and apply it in some fashion to help us look at retention for employees that don't stay around Abilene State School? So the state of Texas, if you don't know, that's a wonderful place. Dedicated, loving people there. I put years of my life into investing in their lives, and that was one of the glorious chapters of my life working for the state school. Along comes something called continuous quality improvement. And so they asked me to lead that directive on continuing finding ways to improve, specifically as it pertains to people in an organization. Well, I was just making barbecue sauce. I decided, sure, why not? I've never done that before, but I'll give it a whirl. Let's go for it. So I'm there, and I start going through continuous quality improvement, and I started doing the research on what it takes to retain people in an organization. Now, there's a question that you have here. What's the cost of not retaining team members? What do you think is the financial cost of losing someone on a team? People calculate that stuff, and I'll give you the number. You tell me what you think it is.
Your salary.
Who said that?
A year's salary.
A year's salary. Some of that goes to a year and a half.
Sure.
A year and a half salary. That comes from an organization called Christmas and Gray out of Chicago.
They were depressed politics.
Salary and a half. So if a person is making $40,000, cost to replace them is $60,000. So what the state was learning is because of all the people they were losing, they were going in the hole. What if they were able to retain their folks and cut back on that cost? So my job was to see what could be done to keep them. So we created that initiative, Continuous Quality Improvement, began to identify. So I did that for a number of years and made some really good inroads. But there's something greater than a financial cost. There is an emotional cost associated with leaving or losing a team member. Think about it. If you've worked with someone for a period of time and you know about their families, chances are there's bonding that has occurred. And as a result of that, when they leave, you grieve. And people go through a grieving experience when they've lost a valued team member. It never shows up on the financial scale, but it happens when people are wondering about something else other than their job. So there's an emotional cost. The second is another kind of cost, and that is team disruption. In spite of having the very best job descriptions that you have, there's always something that's taking place that someone did you didn't count on or didn't expect, but they did it. And when they're gone, all of a sudden you're wondering what happened. Well, there's a social cost with that. Gosh, I've got 5 minutes. I'm enjoying this so much. All right, state school, CQI. I go to the workforce center with Mike. He invites me to come and happen to see that book that I had written. I wondered what in the world I was ever going to do with that, but he happened to see that and said, hey, come work with us. And the focus there was on retention for the state of Texas. And I began to create what's called a white-collar transition team. And I started having ministers who were coming. The state didn't know what to do with a minister. So I began to interview and ask, what is it that makes this unique? And so I created a ministerial retention index and left the workforce center, wound up creating a variety of surveys to minister to ministers. And along comes a Lilly Foundation grant with $1 million to go out to address this matter. I have my hand up, I can help. And so it was used on the East Coast of the United States with Cooperative Baptist Fellowship to help retain ministers. And I created an algorithm that helped me identify some key factors. I could do this instrument, and then they would complete the instrument, and within a matter of 15 seconds, I could look at it and determine if they're going to stay in the ministry. It didn't take me long. But before I get to Ministerial Retention Index, I want to let you know that there's some factors associated with people staying in your organization. And you can identify those pretty quickly. The surveys that I used came up with about 18 different factors. But here are 3 factors that I've come to understand that are the key markers. And if you know what these are, they'll stay with you. If any of these are at stake or at issue, then they're staying with you is problematic. Number 1, I'm just giving you 3 and not putting one above the other. Mission, vision, and values. People are going to come to an organization because they believe in what you're doing. And the guys in the Air Force, that is job number 1 for you. Yes, sir. You're there because of its mission, vision, and values. The second, which is interesting, is relationship with your supervisor. It's not money. It's not benefits. It's how you get along with your supervisor. Do you trust your supervisor? Well, now that is key. If that bond is not made, the person's at risk. Number 3 is the support from your spouse in relation to what you're doing. Now, does that come as a surprise? Did you not hear that from Brian earlier? Did you not hear this from other speakers? Is it not surprising that the family unit trumps all the other stuff, the other 19 factors associated? Therefore, if we know what those are in advance, what are we going to do to address it? I'm going to give you a model for retention. This is an algorithm. Retention is a function of pretest plus intervention plus post-test bracket under the context of continuous quality improvement. Now, this is a medical model. Now, go into an organization or with somebody and say, let's take an instrument to measure workforce retention. And inevitably, what the CEO will say is, we don't have a problem here. What I'm saying is, using a medical model, doing prostate, PSA test, whatever, start with baseline data where you know you're doing something well. You start with what you're doing right, and then you measure from that. So you have a pretest, get the data, figure out where the shortcomings are in that pretest, then you have an intervention or training that goes with it, come back 6 to 9 months later after the training for post-test. Then you can compare your pretest to your post-test right there, and you can determine whether or not you've made a difference. Did the intervention work? This is an outcome. That's what you're looking for here. Can you prove the value of training? Folks throw millions of dollars at training and have no idea what happened to it. Only in the context of an outcome will you know that. You have to measure it. Pre-test, intervention, post-test, continuous quality improvement. I'm rocking along. I made 33 instruments, starting my own business. Mary Beth Peters and I from the Copyright Office of Washington, D.C. are all like best friends. She knows when she sees my stuff coming that it's another copyright application. I had 33 of these done. Probably have more copyrights on retention instruments than anyone in the world. I just say that I put my heart and soul into that. Ministers, workforce center, pastors, associate pastors, ministers of music, congregational surveys, nurses surveys, auxiliary surveys. It's all there. I captured it. Then I hired a team to do the web launch for me. Started collecting data over my own private server. Had my own secured system. I'm hiring people to walk along with me to sell these instruments. I come in one day and I have a blue screen on my server. I have an encryption device that was the most sophisticated that was made, and overnight my encryption was stolen by a Baltic country.
Wow.
It took $40,000 of my software, all my data, all my surveys. It was the same weekend my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. I learned to think about, God, how can I use my mind here to move beyond this great wall that seems to have occurred. And pretty soon people call me for outcome research for clinical pastoral education. And that didn't require software, but it required some research skills. So I started doing outcome research for the American Clinical Pastoral Department out of Atlanta, Georgia. I was the only one. I had the niche in the market. Wonderful people to work with, clinical pastoral education. I put these tools aside and have only the hard copy, but I didn't go back to web launch anything. I'm out of that business again, and I just use phone surveys to get what I needed out of outcomes. This led me to taking care of my father in his declining days. And so I was out of a job for 5 years and just devoted that to live with my dad. And so I gave up the business of Retention Associates and just took care of Dad. And as he passed, his estate came to me, and I invested in real estate. And I had been working on his property as a kid since I was 12 years old. And I know how to do everything in a house as a 12-year-old. And I'd often wondered, Dad, why couldn't I go to the beach like other kids? Why couldn't I take Saturday off instead of selling shoes? I did not know at that time I was being prepared for something different.
Wow.
So I took his gift and translated it into property. And I buy property. And I restore property. And I manage property. And then along comes the lives of people who want the property. And they all have their story. It's not a matter of just having a house anymore. It's providing a home and a hope for someone. So I'm in the hope business now. And I enjoy folks who come to knock on my door or call me and say, do you have a place for me? That phone call. I thought all of this had gone away until I got a call 2 weeks ago from a lady named Angel Poorman, who asked me to resurrect the Missionary Retention Index for missionaries through Iris Ministries. I had no idea that something was dormant. That seed was still growing.
Yes.
My reminder to you is, you never know the seed you've planted can come to harvest at some time. Therefore, we are challenged and called to continue to be a seed sower for others. And someone will ask the question, am I ever in God's will? That students used to ask me that all the time. And my answer is, if you were doing something today that you wouldn't even want to get paid for, would you do it? If the answer is yes, you found God's will.